let's start with the coming renaissance of inherently safe nukes. What's wrong with that idea?
Well, there's a couple things wrong with the idea of a renaissance of inherently safe nukes. It doesn't exist, at least the inherently safe part. We're not looking at utilities that are going to be building what has been called in the past sometimes advanced or inherently safe reactors. There are no utilities that are even considering such designs. The reactor designs that are being considered right now are evolutionary designs. And in fact, that's a description the industry itself gives to these designs. And they're based on the same 1960s, 1970s technology that the existing reactors use, with a few updates, is basically all we're looking at. The truly advanced designs, some of the high temperature reactors, the pebble bed reactor, those are still a decade or more off from even being submitted for license, much less actually being built, and even those designs have shortcomings. So the idea of an inherently safe reactor is as much a fallacy in 2007 as it was in 1977, and it will be in 2037 as well.
Well, but now we're faced with, at the federal level, with the push for loan guarantees, insurance, and we're faced in California with an initiative that's about to be on the ballot to kind of roll back the embargo on new plants until waste problem has been solved. So can you talk about those two issues?
Well, sure. I mean, this is a very persistent industry, and the 2005 Energy Policy Act, passed by Congress, signed by the President, authorizes loan guarantees for the first 6 nuclear reactors. It authorizes expenditures of taxpayer money for what they call risk insurance for licensing, meaning that if groups like NERS cause licensing delays, the utilities will get paid for it. Groups like NERS do not get paid, of course, for participating in the licensing process or upholding democratic rights, but that's a different issue, I guess. And a variety of tax credits for the operation of the first reactors, assuming that they get built, and once they operate, a certain amount of tax credits, which is probably in pure dollar terms the biggest subsidy. And as I said, that was passed in 2005. The loan guarantees do not need to be appropriated, but the way the process works for expenditures of other money, that actually needs to be appropriated by Congress. So far it's only been authorized. No funds have been appropriated. And that will be part of upcoming battles in Congress when that money actually comes up for appropriation. Right now there are no utilities in a position to ask for that money, which is why it hasn't been appropriated yet. So that's an issue that will be coming up. Of more immediate impact on the federal front is that the Senate, as we speak, has passed an energy bill, a new energy bill in 2007, that changes the terms of the loan guarantees, or that would change the terms of the loan guarantees, and essentially uncap them and allow them, the way we read it, the way most people read it, basically give the Department of Energy free rein to spend as much on loan guarantees as it wants for essentially any technology it wants. The House has somewhat different language in the energy bill it passed this year, and we are now awaiting a House-Senate conference committee that will have to take up this issue as well as a number of other highly contentious issues over the next few months. We can't at this point say whether or not a final energy bill actually will emerge at all. Some of the issues are contentious. If the Senate language is adopted, then the nuclear industry is looking for, and they have publicly said this, about $50 billion in loan guarantees. This compares with $15 billion in total subsidies under the 2005 bill, counting the loan guarantees, tax credits, and other money. So it's a huge amount of money. And somewhat ironically, would still only build 10 to 15 reactors, which, if you're worried about climate, if you're worried about the environment, and think nuclear reactor is going to help it, 10, 15 is not going to do anything for climate. It's not going to do anything for anybody except fatten the pockets of the nuclear utilities. Anyway, this is a big upcoming battle. California is being closely watched across the country, precisely because it has a long-standing state law that makes a lot of sense to a lot of us, which is that reactors should not be built unless there is a permanent solution for the radioactive waste. A lot of us believe that it should have been federal policy all along, and California and a few other states have made it at least state policy. In fact, there's going to be an effort made in Maryland in the upcoming legislative year to adopt the California law. And so repeal of that would obviously have huge ramifications across the country. California often leads the way on new and controversial initiatives of all types, and a victory by the nuclear power industry there, whether or not it resulted in an actual new nuclear plant being built in California, which is a whole different subject, would have ramifications for the rest of us. It would be a huge propaganda victory for the nuclear industry, and for that reason, it's being watched very closely by all of us across the country.
What are the major points you're going to bring up with Stuart Brand?
Well, Stuart Brand believes, as I do, that the climate crisis is the most pressing environmental problem facing us, facing the world, and I think it's arguably the most pressing problem of any kind facing the world. Stuart has taken that to an extreme, I believe, in that in wishing to address that, he's willing to grasp at whatever straw there is out there.
It's not only Stuart, it's James Love.
Well, and James Lovelock is another one. James Lovelock's a little bit different to me, but Stuart sort of, much more so than Lovelock, did grow out of the peace and environmental movement of the 60s and 70s in a way that Lovelock really didn't. But I think Brand has let his fear of the climate crisis overcome his understanding of how to deal with it. That's sort of the best way I can put it right now. The facts are very clear. Nuclear power, going nuclear, would worsen the climate crisis, not help it. And this is for a very simple economic reason, which is that nuclear power is the least effective of the possible technologies we have for reducing carbon emissions. And thus, every dollar that we spend on nuclear power is a dollar that is not being most effectively used. We don't have unlimited resources to choose every possible energy alternative out there, so we have to make the wisest choices, and we have to use our resources in the most effective way possible. And that means starting first with energy efficiency. I mean, that's the biggest early thing that we can do as a society, and then moving on from there. Well, and then the other thing I think Stuart doesn't understand, and certainly Lovelock doesn't understand, is that there is no need to trade the environmental problems caused by nuclear power in order to address the environmental problems caused by the climate crisis. They believe that the potential catastrophes that could be caused by the climate crisis, and that are very real, that are accelerating, dwarf those that could be caused by nuclear power. Whether or not they are right, there's no need for us to experience either of them. We can address the climate effectively without using nuclear power. The Institute for Energy and Environmental Research has just completed a major report, a book called Carbon Free and Nuclear Free, and it shows a way for us to be able to get to essentially zero carbon economy by 2050 in a cost-effective and environmentally sound fashion. And using that approach enables us to avoid what the nuclear option would entail, because I think a lot of people may not understand the implications of actually using nuclear power in a manner that would allow it to effectively address climate. You have to understand first that nuclear power is not carbon free. The nuclear fuel cycle produces a certain amount of carbon emissions, so that nuclear comes above the renewable energy sources in terms of its carbon footprint. And the cycle includes uranium mining and milling and processing and enrichment, and all of these things result in carbon emissions, and the carbon emissions are going to increase over time if we chose the nuclear option, because uranium is not a renewable resource. Uranium has to be mined, and we are nearing the end. Nobody knows. I've seen different estimates about how much is out there, but we're nearing the end of the high-grade uranium ore that's readily available, which means you start having to mine and process lower-grade uranium ore, and that in itself causes that processing and trying to enrich that ore causes greater carbon emissions. So as you rely more on nuclear's carbon footprint goes up. So that's number one. Number two, of course, because nuclear is itself a carbon emitter, it takes more nuclear to achieve the types of carbon reductions we need. So the major studies that have been released over the last several years, there was one from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, one from the Commission on Energy Policy, one from the International Atomic Energy Agency itself, the World Nuclear Association's figures. They all agree on the broad outlines of the numbers, which is that for nuclear power to take a major role in reducing carbon emissions would require construction of anywhere from 1,200 to 2,000 new nuclear reactors across the world over this century. We currently have about 440 reactors across the world. So we're looking at anywhere from a 3 to 5-fold increase in reactors, and this is only to get about a 20% reduction in emissions. Nobody argues we're going to a nuclear power world. I mean, this is only about a 20% reduction with this kind of program. Now, if you think about the implications of this kind of program, we have, as I said, we have about 440 reactors. We don't have a single radioactive waste dump in the world that can handle the high-level waste from any of these reactors, not from the first one. To handle a 5-fold increase means building more than 5 times the amount of high-level waste dumps that we already have been planning to build, and we haven't been able to build any of them anywhere. Because the radioactive waste is dangerous, long-lived, and nobody has found a permanent solution to it. It may be that deep geological storage, which is the favored approach of most of the Western nations anyway, will be useful at some point, but we haven't found the right site for it yet. Here in the U.S., it's Yucca Mountain, Nevada, which is clearly the wrong site for it. But embarking on this kind of program means finding, 5 Yucca Mountains in the United States. We haven't been able to build one. And the one site we have looked at, Yucca Mountain, it turns out to be the one site that we know is unsuitable. Enough research has been done to prove that it is the one site in the country that clearly should not have high-level radioactive waste stored there. Other implications. You increase the reactors by 5-fold, you're increasing the accident risk by 5-fold. The more reactors there are, the more likely one of them or more is going to suffer a serious accident. And unlike other technologies, a serious nuclear accident, as we know, can lead to a catastrophic meltdown, can lead to the death of thousands, tens of thousands of people, can lead to the displacement of hundreds of thousands, millions of people, and unlike a weather event where you have a temporary displacement, a nuclear displacement is permanent. There are large swaths of Ukraine, Belarus, Russia where nobody lives and nobody can live and for the next many, many centuries. The proliferation risks. You're creating 5 times as much plutonium, and you're creating having to guard against potential adversaries obtaining plutonium. They just, the drawbacks just go on, and if it were necessary to address climate, well, maybe it would be worth having a greater discussion about those drawbacks and how to address them. But it's not necessary. And that's the whole point, is that we don't need nuclear power to address the climate crisis. And that's what people like Stuart Brand need to understand, is that, and I well understand the fear of unchecked climate change. I mean, it's already a catastrophe in a lot of ways, and I think we're already reaching tipping points, and we're already seeing changes in our planet because of what humans have done and the carbon dioxide we've put up into the air. But adding the environmental problems, the threat of meltdown, the radioactive waste leakage into our drinking water, into our air, we don't need to do those things to address climate. One other factor that needs to be considered is how much time do we have? We are seeing across the planet, especially up in the Arctic, changes that scientists thought would happen 10, 20 years from now. We're seeing them happen already. Just this morning, I was hearing this story about some scientists being taken to Greenland to check on their on their measurements and on their science that they had been looking at, and they told the pilot to fly to a certain coordinate because they wanted to land on the ice there and see how the ice was faring and whether it was receding at the rate expected. Well, they flew there and it was open water. The ice was 15 miles further away. So the scientists who had expected this were shocked. Already the melting had progressed much faster than they had previously believed. So we don't have as much time, perhaps, as we might have once thought. And it's 2007. We currently have 104 nuclear reactors in the United States right now. In 2017, we will have 104 or fewer reactors in the United States because there will not be any nuclear reactors completed in the next 10 years. Even if a utility submits a full application tomorrow, which is not going to happen, the licensing and construction process are such that nobody's going to be finished in 10 years, even if they start tomorrow, even if they arrange the financing tomorrow. So in 10 years from now, we're either going to have 104, which is what we have now, or we'll have fewer because some will have closed. Now we can use those 10 years, and should use those 10 years, to take steps that can make immediate changes, such as energy efficiency, which is very quick to implement, such as solar rooftop programs, such as solar parking lot programs, such as building and accelerating the construction of wind turbines where those are useful. There's a lot of steps we can take that are a lot cheaper than nuclear power and that can actually work to cut emissions right now. The problem is that if we commit large sums of money to a nuclear construction program that will be slow and ineffective, we won't have those resources available to implement those technologies that we know work. And also to help those technologies along that we know work, but right now are a little too expensive, like some of the solar photovoltaics. All that is lacking to bring those down in price is mass production and mass installation. And that is where governments can play a major role, is in stimulating demand for those. This government can play that kind of role, help stimulate that demand. We already have governments in Germany, Spain, where every new residential structure is required to have solar rooftop. We already have some governments working that way, and the United States government should be doing that too.
And what about the subsidy issues? Withdrawing subsidies from coal and nukes and putting them elsewhere?
Well, I think there are a lot of forms of subsidies. That there are loan guarantees is a form of subsidy. Tax credits are a form of subsidies. My own preference is that we choose, because it is Congress's and the government's role to choose and to make wise choices. My own personal preference would be that to the extent they use subsidies, that they choose to do that with renewable technologies and energy efficiency. I'm actually okay with the concept of no subsidies for energy source and let the market handle it, but with the government stepping in and saying, okay, but we're going to have a carbon cap, not a carbon cap and trade, just a carbon cap, where the society can only produce so much carbon, and then let the market figure out how to reach that carbon cap, because that will lead to increased energy efficiency, it will lead to solar, and it will lead to wind. Those are the technologies that work best, work fastest, and work cheapest. So I'm happy with that, but if we're going to have subsidies, then I think they need to be oriented toward the technologies that will bring us a clean and sustainable energy future, not just for the next 10, 50 years, but will lead to the technologies being developed for the next millennia. And that is clearly the renewables, and it's clearly the sun, and I don't think there's really, I don't think anybody has any question about the long term, that's what the long term is. The question is, how quickly can we bring that long term in? And I think the climate crisis has made us realize that we need to bring that long term in on a much more compressed time scale than maybe we would have thought. And maybe I should add something, because when I talk about these kinds of technologies, it also means changes to the grid. It means changes to the whole production and distribution system of electricity. It means going to distributed generation, smaller electricity generators closer to the point of service, because in a variety of different types of solar and renewable technologies. There is an intermittency problem with solar and wind. You're not going to rely on just one technology. You're going to rely on many, and you're going to rely on much more distributed, much more highly technological type of grid system than we have now. We really have a pretty antiquated grid system, and it's pretty much falling apart. I mean, we've seen that in some of the blackouts we've had over the last few years. And we need a lot of investment in grid, but if we're going to make that kind of investment, again, it's a matter of choosing wisely and putting together a much more distributed grid that will, again, lead us into the future.
Is there anything that the people can do to avert the government going forward on the nuclear program and all the stupidity of the false solutions here and towards the other? What would you say to people? Could people do?
Talk about it to each other, to your friends, to your neighbors, to your PTAs, to your church groups, to your local environmental groups, to your food co-ops, to whoever you happen to see. Eventually, you have to get up to Congress, your state legislators, your federal legislators. I'm a believer in citizen action. I'm a believer in citizen lobbying. It works. It really does. Calling members of Congress works. They don't like it necessarily. We've gotten complaints this past week because of a campaign we're doing to have people call the House Majority Leader, Steny Hoyer, who's a Democrat from Maryland and is supporting the loan guarantees. And for the last 10 days, people from all over the country have been calling his office and complaining about his support for the loan guarantees and asking him to work on behalf of the entire nation and not his local utility, which happens to want these loan guarantees. And his office has been complaining about how many calls they're getting, but that's, that he asked for the job, he ran for it, and that's his problem. Citizen action really does work. I've seen votes turned on, in the House of Representatives, turned on 10 phone calls. But also, I think, one of the things we're trying to come to grips with and trying to figure out how to do better is use some of the newer technologies in the Web 2.0 and is a means of organizing and working with people. I mean, how do you use these new technologies in a way that's most effective? We found, for example, that emails to Congress are almost worthless. You get these mass emails, and unless you're getting huge numbers in, tens of thousands in a single congressional district or hundreds of thousands into a statewide, to a U.S. Senate thing, they're basically just counted and dismissed. You have to really be able to show a huge mobilization, and most organizations can't do that. Most issues don't draw that kind of outpouring of sentiment. It's much more effective the old-fashioned pick up the phone and call. Handwritten letters work great to the extent that they actually can get there. It's much better to send them to district offices than the U.S. Congress, because the delay in getting mail to the U.S. Congress can be 3 months or so. But the local offices can use that.
Faxes?
Faxes can work, but fax numbers change awful quick.
Okay, so it's phoning.
Phoning definitely works best. I mean, using the internet for organizing and mobilizing works great, but using it as your means of connection with your policymakers, doesn't work as well. And think about it this way: how often do you respond to emails from people you don't know? They show up in your spam filter, probably. you know, you don't pay that much attention to it. What you pay attention to is an email from somebody you do know saying, "Hey, look at this," or you know, "This is important," and you'll read that. Well, it's the same way for the policymakers. You know, why should they pay attention to, you know, these emails that come in from all these people that they don't know? They don't know, you know, they don't know if it's machine generated. They don't know if it's, you know, when it becomes too easy to participate, they will take from it that, okay, this person cared enough about this issue to click a button. Well, that's, you know, it gives extra impetus to the person who cares enough to pick up a phone and actually talk to a person, because that person clearly cares more about the issue, or at least, you know, the perception is that. You know, even if you call late at night and all you get is an answering machine, you know, you're still taking a much more proactive step. So we really encourage the phone calls, but we, you know, really encourage, however you do it, you know, demonstrations, you know, civil disobedience. I mean, you know, the whole realm of possible citizen action. Writing letters to the editor, op-eds. I mean, Congress members read those. I mean, those count. Newspapers in a district start getting a lot of letters on a particular subject. Congressional offices sit up and notice that. So, you know, all the different possible forms of participation are meaningful. But if you want that direct contact, you make that direct phone call.
Yeah.